Hey guys, how's it going? It's Travis Mortz with the Forest Hill Film Lab. Today I'm actually going to be talking about something I've already made a video about. For those of you who have been following me, I used to have this Sunny 16 basic daylight exposure video. I was really proud of it, but for some reason, I'm not really sure why, but YouTube removed the video. I don't know if it was an intentional thing or what the hell happened, but I don't have the video anymore, and I originally filmed it on my cell phone, so even if I did have it still on my phone, which I don't, that I still probably wouldn't want to post it because my quality of videos has gotten a little better since then. So I'm kind of trying to keep with that theme. So basically, today I'm going to talk with you guys again about shooting without a light meter, and this time I feel like I'm going to get a little bit nerdier about it and go a little even further in depth than I did in my first video. Now that I'm a little more comfortable on my YouTube channel and whatnot. So we're going to really dive into this thing and talk about basic daylight exposure, what the hell it is, what we're looking for, and we're going to learn something. So stay tuned and we will get started. So this is going to be my guide to basic daylight exposure, but the thing is that learning basic daylight exposure is not so simple. You're not just learning basic daylight exposure. You're learning how to read light. That's what we're doing in this video. I'm going to teach you guys how to read light with only using your eyes, and a little bit of educated guessing, I suppose. So first and foremost, I'm sure you guys have noticed that this video is being shot in black and white. The reason I did that was just kind of to emphasize the way light works. Light is just bouncing off of everything, and when we see different colors in the world, it could be a little misleading. A bright red might indicate more light coming off of it, although it might just be the color of the red. So because of that, I made this video black and white because we want to see light in its absolutely natural source. It's absolutely as plain as day, which is just black and white. And this is the way I expose my images as well. I mean, even if I'm shooting color film, I'm exposing it as if I'm shooting black and white film. I'm keeping in mind that, hey, I'm going to look at this middle gray concrete, and that's where I'm going to determine my light from. I'm not going to be looking into shadow and determining it from that. I'm not going to be looking at light green grass and thinking that it's brighter, or dark green grass and thinking it's darker. I'm only looking at the amount of light bouncing off that subject. For example, my face here. You can see my face is brighter and my hat is darker. Why is that? Well, that is because there's less light bouncing off of my hat. So if there's less light bouncing off my hat, there's less light coming into the camera, therefore leaving this underexposed. My face has a much more light. This is how light works. It's all about percentage. How much percent is bouncing off of you? Middle gray, let me see. I've got a gray card up here somewhere. Where the hell is it? Alright, sorry, I started talking about middle gray and then completely didn't have a gray card on hand. So, my example is, middle gray. That is this gray card here. This is a example. This is middle gray. 18% gray. What that means is 18% of the light that hits this bounces off. So that means if we expose this to be middle gray, if we meter this and we determine that we want to make this middle gray, then it's going to make my white face whiter, and it's going to make my black hat darker. And if I turn it over, this is now reflecting 90% light. And if I was going to make this middle gray by exposing this down, it's going to make everything dark. We have to expose this as it is. It is white. So we wouldn't judge off of this white back. We wouldn't read our light off of this. We would never read our light off of white, because too much is bouncing off for us to determine. We want to read our light off of gray. And that's with our eyes is what I'm talking about. When we're out in the world, look at the things that aren't bouncing a ton of light off of it, because then you're going to expose your things incorrectly. We want to look at the most neutral gray we could find, and that is where we're going to determine our light source from. So that is why I'm shooting this video in black and white, is because I want you to see the world in tones. The world is no longer blue, red, green, none of that. The world is black and white and gray. So gray is what we're exposing for, because if we expose for gray, then black will be good and white will be good. You understand? So we're going to move on from here, but this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to make our grays gray, and then make our whites white and our blacks blacks. This is basically simple zone system stuff that you can apply to your everyday photography. So we're going to move on. I want to talk to you guys about the gray card and just about gray shit. So here we go. As you see here, I've got a couple old cameras, and the special thing about these old cameras is that they were introduced with no light meter. These cameras were sold with no light meter. A guy would just buy it and he wouldn't think much of it. Now, today that's insane. Nobody would buy a camera without a light meter in it. How am I supposed to get my exposure right? Well, it's very, very simple. It's all a formula. All of this stuff's a formula. And if we don't know this formula, then how can we be so sure that we're doing a good job when we're shooting digitally? A lot of guys out there like shooting wide open. Good for you guys. Shooting wide open's a blast. But then they'll also shoot wide open at 800 ISO. And then they'll look at their camera settings and they'll see that their camera settings are way out of whack. Well, if you don't know what your exposure is supposed to be outside, if you don't know, hey, you know, it's only 125 f16 outside, why do I have these extreme ass settings? Then you don't know that you're doing anything wrong. So that's basically what we're talking about here. We want to talk about how to get the right settings and how to know what the light is. We're reading light. We're not just guessing anymore. None of that shit. We're knowing exactly what our exposure is, and we're going to nail it every single time because there's really no reason not to. So I'm going to get started. I've got this piece of paper here. I'm just going to write some shit on here. So, where the hell am I sharpening? See if this writes. Okay. So, basically there's three things that make up an exposure. We've got our shutter speed, which is our duration. We've got our aperture, which is the amount of light that we let on the film for the amount of time that we choose. And then we have our ISO, and that's our camera's, our film's sensitivity to light. Well, I'm talking to film shooters here, and if you guys want to apply this to digital, you go right ahead. But when you put film in a camera, it is no longer variable. That shit is in there, and it is what it is. If it's 100 ISO film, it's 100 ISO film. So we're going to put 100 ISO right here. No longer variable. That shit's locked in. I'm going to even put a square around it. 100 ISO, locked in. No longer variable. Nothing. We don't need to worry about that shit anymore. If I ever hear someone say, bump up your ISO one more time, I'm going to lose it. That's not how you make your photos better. ISO is not a variable. It never has been a variable, and it shouldn't be a variable now. You set it and you forget it. So there's my rant. ISO, 100 ISO, that's what I like shooting. Now, if that's not variable, we don't need to worry about it again. All we have to do from here for the Sunny 16 rule is we match our shutter speed to the closest that our ISO can be. So if we have 100 ISO, we're going to use 1 over 125 shutter speed. Cool. That was easy. You know, all you got to do is look at your camera and think about which number is the closest. We're going to lock that shit in too. There we go. No longer variable. Those are both set settings now. That's it. Locked in. So now we only have a couple things to choose from. And I'm going to talk about this lens here. And we're going to talk about the Rolly, because these things both max out at 2.8. And they have limited shutter speed. So either way, our shutter speed is not a variable, so it doesn't matter. 1.6. Here it is. This is the Sunny 16 rule. This is so simple. So what have I done here? I've chosen our ISO, which is determined by whatever film you put in your camera. Then I've chosen our shutter speed, which is also determined by whatever film you put in your camera. And then I wrote the f16 here. And what this means is, this exposure here, these three settings, no matter where you go on the planet, if it's sunny day outside with no clouds in the sky, this is your exposure. No matter what. This is it. We're going to just say this is it. We don't need to question it from here on out. We know. We know that f16 is always going to be the correct exposure for sunlight. Do we ever have more light than sunlight? No, not usually. It's about the biggest light source, and so if we could judge, if we know that 16 is the most we're ever going to be shooting, if we match our ISO with our shutter speed, we don't need to even worry about what about if it's brighter. It's sunlight, so it's not going to be brighter. So now all we have to worry about is, well, what if it's darker than sunlight? That's all we need to think about. So f16 is sun. I'm going to put a little sun right here. And you know when it's cloudy outside and sometimes the sun will pass behind a cloud, but it's still a pretty nice damn day outside, we're going to make that F11. And these are all incremental changes. If it's only a little bit darker than sunlight, F11. And if it's a little darker than that, F8. So, you know, we'll put a sun here with little smaller streaks. So F8, that's going to be a cloudy day. I like F8 because F8 tells me it's a cloudy day. So I know, hey, if it ain't cloudy outside, I only got 2 settings I have to think of. That's it. If it's a sunny day outside and it might be sunny or kind of sunny, I got 2 settings all day I have to think about. And I know because I've done the research, I know that these settings are correct. I could trust it and I'm not worried about it. So 8 is our cloud. And F56, my handwriting's awful, guys, I apologize. F56 would be, you know, shade. It's shade under a tree, you know, where the sunlight's maybe poking through a little bit. It is sunny outside, but you're under a shade tree. That's 5/6. I'm not going to draw that because it'd be terrible. So 5/6 is under a shade tree, which would make F4, what's darker than that? I don't know, maybe shade that's not under sunlight. Maybe just shade. Maybe just dark shade. F4. And then F28, the almighty F28, that's where we're going to stop because this is going to cover your whole day. F28's dusk, sundown. We like sundown. So here we go. We got shade, and then we got tree shade. I am going to draw it after all. So here we go. Now I just summed up any day at the zoo. Any day that you guys are going to go out and do anything is on this chart now. So if we know that all of these situations can be covered just by changing our aperture, well, look, it's no longer guessing. It's an educated guess. And also the beauty of it is, hey, what if it's cloudy out and you mess up and you think that you should be at 5/6 and you're like, oh, I think 5/6 is right, even though it was supposed to be F8. That's only one stop that you missed. And one stop isn't going to change the image. I mean, it's going to change it a bit, but it's not going to ruin it. You're not going to not have a photo. And if you're 2 stops off, if you think that it's cloudy amount of light, but it's really dark shade amount of light, you're still only 2 stops off. But I mean, clearly the difference between those 2 lighting situations is apparent enough that you probably won't have that issue. So basically what I'm telling you guys is that it's very, very simple. Now this works no matter what film you put in your camera because our film matches our shutter speed. So we only have 6 things to worry about. We only have 6 settings to choose from, and God forbid we're 1 or 2 off, we're still going to have latitude enough to cover that. If you're shooting HP5, you can't go wrong. You cannot expose your film wrong because I just told you about this. I want to read this book to you guys a little bit, just so you can get a little better idea of what we're really doing here. So this paragraph here inspired me quite a bit, so I thought I'd tell you. This is the first thing. This is an encyclopedia of photography. This was printed in 1962. This was printed when photographers had to be badasses. Nobody was out there with their phone in the wedding aisle taking pictures. This was, if you were a photographer, you knew about exposure, you knew about aperture, and you could talk about film. So, first paragraph in this says, the first step in making a photograph is the exposure of the negative. That's still true. And even if we're shooting digital, it's still true. We're not going to do this shit later. We need to do it now. We need to expose it correctly in the present so we don't have to fuck with it later. So anyway, sorry. If this is not correctly done, all remaining steps will be either difficult or impossible. This article explains the principles of exposing photographic film. So it says, the remaining steps will be difficult or impossible. Now, how wonderful would photography be if everybody thought with this premise? If everybody thought, if I don't get exposure correctly, it's going to make my life harder later. It's going to make my development process harder. It's going to make my printing process harder. It might even make it impossible if I don't do this right. This is something that we have lost. We have completely lost this. We just shoot and look and shoot and look and shoot and look. Well, there's no way to judge a good image while you're out there looking at this shit. You judge it before you take it. You determine if it's worth it before you press the button, and you also should be determining your exposure. So, a negative is correctly exposed when the print from it will correctly reproduce all tones in the scene in their original brightness. What that tells me is that there's no real perfect exposure for any piece of film. It is perfect given the situation in which it was shot in. If this portrait will make a good print, then it's a good exposure. Is it a perfect exposure? Could it have been better? Maybe so. But what determines a good exposure is basically how much data you recovered from the scene you were shooting. So I just want to talk to you guys a little bit about that, because I think it's important to look at these old books. You know, back in the day when somebody needed information, they couldn't get on YouTube and listen to me talk. They had to look at this book, and if this book didn't have everything they needed, they had nowhere else to go. So you know what that means? This book has everything you need. Everything you need. I mean, just on that first page I was showing you guys, it's talking about sensitive silver halide, sensitometry, transmission measurement, opacity measurement. I can't even read that damn word. This is photography. This is the exposure section of the photography book. This is the most simple shit that nobody thinks about anymore, because this is how detailed it used to be. This is how important exposure really is, and that's what I want to teach you guys, is that there's no reason to be scared of shooting film because you don't have a light meter, or because you don't trust your film, or because you're not sure if your camera's working correctly. It is. It's going to work fine. And there's really no reason why you cannot get an image out of your film. So let's go over this again. ISO, shutter speed, coupled. No longer variable. And now we just have this short range from here to choose from. It's so simple. So we got sunlight, shade, dusk. It's pretty straightforward. Well, basically, I've already pretty much summed it up. There's really not much to it. I'm really done explaining it to you guys, but I want to go a little bit deeper than that and challenge you guys. I want to challenge you guys to something, and I hope it changes the way you look at things. When you leave your house after watching this video, go outside and go without a camera, but just look around. Look around at what you're seeing. Go stand in the middle of the street where there's no tree cover and look at your hand, and that's sunny 16 if it's sunny outside. That's F16. And go stand underneath a shade tree and think, this is probably 5.6. Or if it's cloudy, look outside and think to yourself, maybe this is F8. You know, if it's not totally sunny. But start looking at things. Start adding aperture values to things in your everyday life, because that's all we're doing. That's all sunny 16. That's all exposure is doing. This shit does not matter. Our 100 and 125th of a second, that's completely irrelevant, because it's determined by our film choice. It's already predetermined. We don't need to worry about it. The world is apertures. The whole entire world is apertures. It's either f16 or it's f2.8 and anything in between. That's it. Now, is it going to be darker? Of course it could be darker. If it's nighttime, well, I'll talk to you guys about that shit later. But what I'm talking about is daytime. Before the sun sets, this is what you need to know. This is what you need to go off of. Sorry, my dog's outside rustling around. So, just think about that. Go walk around and look at everything and add an aperture value to it. And even if you're kind of wrong, you're close. You're gonna be close because you have eyeballs, and your eyeballs can determine intensities of light and differences in shade and things like that. That's the best thing, is that there's no reason to buy a light meter. Why buy a light meter when you have eyeballs? Yeah, it'll be more accurate, but not much more accurate, you guys. I mean, if I take out my digital Sekonic, I'll guess first and spot meter, and I'm almost always within decimal points of being correct. It's not very difficult to guess this shit. It's pretty simple. It's played out. It's very, very easy to understand. So I just want to talk to you guys about one more thing. Of course, you guys aren't always going to want to be shooting at the shutter speed that your ISO dictates. That is not common. You want freedom. You want to be able to choose all of your settings. Well, that's fine. You can. Go for it. Because we're only using the sunny 16 rule to determine what our exposure should be. And it's a good base. It's a foundation. It's easy. So we use this rule to determine our exposure, but that doesn't dictate what we set our settings at actually. So here I wrote down, if our shutter speed is 1/25th at f16, if that's what our exposure is supposed to be, very simple, it's sunny outside, then that means if we want to shoot at 1,000th of a second, it's going to be a 3-stop difference. We're going to go here, I'll show you guys. We're at 1/25th. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3 stops to 1,000. And now we were on 16. We're going to go 1, 2, 3 stops open. And now we've got an equivalent exposure. So now 1000 at 5.6 is equivalent to sunny 16. So what we've done is we've effectively opened up the entire range of our shutter speed and aperture, and we have full control over what our image looks like by being able to change our depth of field. But we read the light from the get-go, and we determined our exposure based on the sunny 16 rule, and then adjusted from there. And this is how I work in my daily life. This Rolleiflex maxes out at 500th of a second. So you know what that means for me? Automatically I know. No matter what, it's very simple that, hey, if it's sunny, if it's f16 outside, that's 500 f8 every time. 500 f8, no problem. I mean, obviously given the film I'm shooting. So you learn these things, and then it becomes second nature to just know exposures instantly. When I'm out shooting a portrait session, I set my exposure, and I'm going to leave it. 2 days ago, I shot a portrait session on my Hasselblad. You better believe it was sunny outside. Just set it. I shot 100, 125th, f16. I set it the second my foot stepped on the field I was shooting on, and I didn't touch my settings all day. Why would I? Was the sun changing? No. Was the light changing? No. Was it going to get less sunny? No. And you know what? All my exposures were dead perfect. They couldn't have been more perfect, because if I made an f22, it would have been one stop underexposed, because I know that daylight is f16. We know that. It's never going to be different. If you're in the snow, it'll be different. That's not daylight. That's your light bouncing off of the ground. If you're in sand, it's not daylight. That's the daylight bouncing off the ground. That's the grade card stuff I was talking about. Yes, if you're standing on ground that's not reflecting 90% of the light into your face, then it's going to be sunny f16. So basically, I just wanted to talk to you guys about this, make another video, because I was really stoked on my first one, but unfortunately YouTube took it down. So I thank you guys for watching, and I really hope that this helped you read light. That's what we're doing. We're not just guessing anymore. There's no guessing in photography. There doesn't need to be. There's a formula for it already here for us. It's been around since forever, and it's not changing. It's set in stone, and that's how it goes. So I hope you guys get out there and shoot some photos, and don't be scared. Don't be scared to leave the light meter at home and feel that freedom. And also, feel that reward. There's nothing more rewarding than shooting without a light meter, coming home and having great exposures and realizing, holy shit, this is what a real photographer feels like. This is it. I have conquered it. I could not be any more of a photographer than I am right now. After you've done your own thing and you've shot your camera with just a shutter speed and aperture, that's about as photographer as it gets. So anyways, I will quit talking now. Thank you guys for watching, and until next time, keep on shooting.